Of a throwback. I'm doing this on my old Mac, which I still absolutely love. I refuse to update. And so this is a re-recording of Sourced Legitimate Criticisms of Trans Youth Healthcare, and it's structured now in a more coherent fashion to begin with, or to kind of descend. So we're gonna start with the most legitimate criticisms, and then work our way down from there. And uh, So here we go. So number one, I would say at the moment, surgeries are not helpful. Source: corrections to Brandstrong and Pachinkis. This is published in the American Journal of Psychiatry, which is the top 1% of the world. And that's the second source on the page. The American Psychiatric Association rates the journal the most widely read psychiatric journal in the world. Right here. Achieved an impact factor of 19. The score can be interpreted as an average. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. The top 200 ahead of 99% of journals in the world. What does this actually say? So this says, the title of it is Reduction in Mental Health Treatment Utilization Among Transgender Individuals After Gender Affirming Surgeries, a total population study. So this was a bit of an oopsie on the author's part. So they flubbed up their math quite famously now, and they published results that were the opposite of what they thought. They thought they had a strong case one way, and then they published it, and multiple people reached out to the journal and said, hey, you forgot to add the 1 and carry the 0, and your results are not what you think they are. And they published this restatement. And what does the restatement say? After the article, reduction in mental health treatment utilization among transgender individuals was published in 2019. Journal received many letters containing questions on the statistical methodology employed. Upon request, reanalysis, the authors agreed, and the outcomes between individuals diagnosed with gender incongruence who had received gender-affirming surgical treatments and those diagnosed with gender incongruence who had not. The results demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to subsequent mood or anxiety disorders, and no advantage in regard to suicide attempts. Okay? So we're going to look at this real quick. So this is the journal, the American Journal of Psychiatry. All right? And, pause it here. It says, I'm not making this, that's the direct quote. And so there's no correlation between surgical outcomes and mental health outcomes or suicide outcomes. Let's see if I can find it here exactly. While this comparison was performed retrospectively and was not part of the original research question, given that several other factors may differ between the groups, the results demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to subsequent mood or anxiety disorder related healthcare visits or prescriptions or hospitalizations following suicide attempts in that comparison. Okay? Now let's look at this. This is talking about the journal. So this is the American Psychiatric Association, and this is ranking the journal, ranking the APA, are ranking the American Journal of Psychiatry, the most widely read psychiatric journal in the world. Top 200 ahead of 99% of journals in the world. So this is like the best source of the best source of the best source you'd want. You can't get better than this. This is the 1% of journals. Okay? Doesn't get better than this in terms of sources. Okay, lack of surgical options. Lack of surgical options, bad options, and no effect on mental health. Tissue options for construction of vaginal canal and gender-affirming vaginoplasty, GAV. Here's the link. Recent robotic and laparoscopic approaches that harvest peritoneum have emerged as potential solutions to penoscrotal hypoplasia or limited genital skin in cases of GAV. GAV is the gender-affirming vaginoplasty. In the author's experience in attending transgender health meetings and via direct communication, some centers offer primary GAV using perineal flaps to all patients, while other centers offer this operation only to patients with insufficient genital skin. This is because this is a woefully downgraded surgery. This is the worst option. And the reason for that is this. The name of the study here. Peritoneum is sensitive to pain, pressure, friction, cutting, and temperature. There's no touch sensation with this tissue. Okay? And this tissue has to be used, or almost always has to be used, when there's penoscrotal hypoplasia, and it doesn't have. So you think about this. You got an individual who's put on puberty blockers at 11, Tanner stage 2, beginning of Tanner stage 2, male to female, and they are left with a 1 to 2 inch genitalia, and they have to construct a neovagina. In that case, they need a lot of skin and a lot of tissue, and the best place they're finding to get the tissue where it will hold for the lifetime or longevity is the peritoneum. But the peritoneum is not sensitive to pain, pressure, friction, or is only sensitive to pain, pressure, friction, cutting, and temperature. There's no touch. It's nothing. It's basically the interior of your gut, and it's just kind of, it's like an odd kind of secondary sensation. You don't have like direct touch sensation. So imagine that scenario where you got 1 to 2 inches to work with, and they're constructing your vagina. You got probably what would be 70% of this is constructed with this tissue that isn't sensitive to touch at all. That's crazy. And then in transgender, and here's another source. This is an anatomy website. Peritoneum is sensitive to pain, pressure, laceration, temperature. Same thing. Transgender and gender diverse children and adolescents. Endocrine Society. This is like a pamphlet that they issued. Risks include infertility, particularly if started in early puberty, low bone mineral density, headaches, hot flashes, fatigue, and mood alterations. For younger transgender girls, puberty blocking medications will limit tissue available from penile and scrotal growth for future surgical treatments. But surgeons may be able to use tissue from other locations in this setting. Okay? And then we have the WPATH leaks. These are published in a Supreme Court case. This is the number of the case, U.S. Department of Ed versus Louisiana. The president of WPATH, if you don't know who WPATH is, WPATH sets the standard for transgender care in the world currently. And this is the president, Dr. Marcy Bowers, commenting on an internal board. So what happened was there were some leaks, and a physician who was working with WPATH saw some of the things they were discussing and wanted to leak it, wanted to spread it to the world and let the world know what these internal documents said. And they did that. And these are from that publication, and as published in the Supreme Court case. And the president of the entire organization says, to date, she writes, I'm unaware of an individual claiming the ability to orgasm when they were blocked at Tanner stage 2. Tanner stage 2 is the beginning of puberty. It can be as young as 9 in girls. That's kind of crazy. in theory, it's important that you. This is another doctor. In theory, it's important that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old. But I know I'm talking to a blank wall. One Canadian endocrinologist says. So basically, this is just saying that these children aren't able to understand what they're writing off to. They're signing a contract that they can't. They can't contractually. They can't contractually bind themselves to this mentally or just in any fashion whatsoever because they're not capable mentally. And then also, puberty is an onset as a critical transition for neural development. The study examines how the onset of puberty marks a critical transition in neural development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and limbic system. It suggests that puberty hormones play a significant role in the maturation of circuits involved in cognitive control and emotion regulation. No puberty maturation, or no puberty, no maturation of genitalia or the brain. So if this person never goes through their signs, you can't go through. If I'm male, I can't go through a female puberty. You have to go through the puberty of whatever sex you're born, and if you don't go through the puberty, these these critical transitional periods and neural developments don't happen in the prefrontal cortex in the limbic system. Subcortical gray matter changes in transgender subjects after long-term cross-sex hormone administration. Divergent results have been reported concerning the effects of hormone administration on brain structure, including side effects like brain atrophy and dementia. Okay, so not only are we leaving these individuals with undeveloped genitalia, but we're leaving them with undeveloped brains as well. You have to go through puberty to develop your brain. Okay? Sweden's healthcare ministry states puberty suppressants and hormones currently do more harm than good. Updated recommendations for hormone therapy for gender dysphoria in young people. And there are no firm conclusions about the efficacy and safety of the treatments. The risks outweigh the benefits at this time based on the results that have emerged. The National Board of Health and Welfare overall conclusion is that the risks of puberty inhibiting and gender affirming hormone treatment for those under 18 of age currently outweigh the possible benefits for the group as a whole. I had direct email contact with the doctor who published this, or wrote this, and there's his contact information. And we'll click on this and we'll go to it, and we'll do Google Translate, and there's the title, and you can read these yourself. I'm not going to read all this. There are no firm conclusions about the efficacy and safety of the treatments. The risks outweigh the benefits at this time. Okay? And my point is that there can be firm conclusions about the safety and efficacy, and the risks don't have to outweigh the benefits. The benefits can outweigh the risks, but currently it's positioned in the opposite fashion. So we have to dial in the science. The science has to get better. The science is young. The science is underdeveloped, and it has to be developed more. And if anybody expects, it's legal now in 25 states in the United States. It has to have a maturing process, and it has to be discussed in society if we want to restore 25 states to have gender or youth gender health care. And so elevated suicide rates. So there's multiple studies. All of these say the same thing. A lot of them don't talk about whether it was a group and what treatments they had. They kind of talk about them as a whole. Although this one does say that our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as a treatment and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. This is basically a restatement of exactly what I just said. Dial in the science, prove it, inspire, improve. Varied reports about this, peer-reviewed gray literature, 42 studies, across 42 studies, that the numbers are elevated. And this is the main takeaway. Lifetime thoughts about 4 or 5 times higher. Lifetime attempts about 6 times higher. The past year, adults nearly 12 times higher. And the prevalence of is 18 times as a whole. And then if you believe that the reason for these elevated rates is these people are being, persecuted in society, well, then I'd ask you, how do we explain this? So this is the CDC source for low suicide rate amongst the black population. And oddly enough, the black population has like the lowest rate of suicide, 8.7 per 100K, whereas age-adjusted rate for general population would be 17.4. So you look at this, multiply this 18 times higher, 18 times 18, right? What is that, nearly 300, in between 3 and 400? Absolutely wild. Let's see here, 18. Crap. $324. So that's a huge number. And then going down, Erickson theory of mind. Here's the source. Empirical validation. So this was a study done where they had 507 college students, and they determined that what Erickson originally thought was true, and that basically identity, so Erickson has a theory of mind that says 12 to 18 is the time when identity is being formed, not that it's formed at a younger age. The stage is specifically called identity versus identity confusion because identity confusion causes psychological problems during this stage. And then 507 college students were designed in a multiple regression analysis. Results supported hypothesis indicated that identity processes crystallized in late adolescence as posited by Erickson. 12 to 18 is what Erickson originally outlined, and our study is in congruence, finding that the stage ends at approximately 17 to 20. Okay, here's a textbook source talking about Erickson theory of mind. Stage of adolescence, it's the 5th stage. Stage name, identity versus identity confusion. Erickson is credited with coining the term identity crisis. He describes identity crisis as a critical part of development in which an adolescent or youth develops sense of self. Identity crisis involves the integration of the physical self, personality, potential roles, and occupations. Note, according to Erickson, this is when a person develops identity. It's in a state of flux during this stage. It's not developed, it's developing. Again, not developed, developing. Fallacy alert. So if you're going to tell me gender is a special part of identity that forms separate of self, then that would be special pleading in reference to Erickson theory of mind. Now, and a lot of these correspond with each other and correlate to each other. So you have Erickson theory of mind, which correlates with the prefrontal cortex. What we know about the prefrontal cortex. What do we know about the prefrontal cortex? We know that the prefrontal cortex matures last, not finishing until after age 25. That means that executive brain functions such as reason, long-range planning, and impulse controls aren't fully operational during adolescence. We see so many mental illnesses that start during the teen years because there are so many moving parts that can go wrong, Geed said. Though teens are vulnerable, most become happy and healthy members of society. Geed is the individual who is responsible for scanning under the hood of the adolescent brains and writing this article in Harvard.edu on Harvard.edu website. It's well known in neurology that the prefrontal cortex is where higher functions like thought, reasoning abilities, and identity come from. It's not fully developed until 25. However, it's mostly developed by 20, in line with what Erickson posits, or with what Erickson's theory posits. Missed a apostrophe there. So we're going to do a little syllogism here. Major premise. The prefrontal cortex is one of the brain regions that underlie complex processes of self-reflecting, goal-setting, commitment, and planning for one's own identity. Minor premise. During adolescence, the prefrontal cortex undergoes maturation, changes in structure and connectivity, and individual differences in this maturation are associated with how adolescents explore and commit to their identities, as shown by structural fMRI studies. Although, if we don't let them undergo maturation, as talked about before, puberty plays a fundamental role in the brain maturing. And in conclusion, therefore, identity formation is associated with and partially depends on the maturing of the prefrontal cortex during adolescence. Okay, here's two studies that show functional MRI that use functional MRI to scan the brain along its development period and show that it progresses until about 25. Maturation of widely distributed brain functions subserves cognitive development and a shift from diffuse to focal cortical activity with development. These are studies. All I gotta do is copy and then we can paste and look up. And these are all available, right? These are all widely available. This is NIH's website. So I'll make these available in the comments, and if it's too long for the comments or too long for the for below the video, you can take a screenshot and then you can use Google Lens, or if you're on iOS, you can simply just take a screenshot and then with just iOS's system, you can just copy and paste the text, or you can copy the text from whatever picture you take. So that's a really easy way to grab anything you want to grab from here. And then, and then we have critical period hypothesis. It's a very, very famous case in psychology. The girl's name was Jeannie. Jeannie was horridly, horridly abused, and she was left in a room by herself for most of her life. And she was found, I believe, at the age of like 8 or 9 or something. And it was after what psychiatrists believed was the critical period for language development. And the case, it turned out to be true. It turned out to be that Jeannie never actually was never able to learn language fully. She was able to learn some language. She was able to read and write some. She was able to speak some, but she was very, very, very undeveloped because what's believed is the critical period hypothesis, that the brain, the critical period hypothesis is the idea that there's a specific window of time during development when the human brain is especially able to acquire certain skills, most famously language. In the case of Jeannie, this is the most famous case study, most all of psychology. Most people know about this. And after this period ends, learning those skills becomes much more difficult or even impossible to do fully. Major premise: the brain has critical periods during which it is primed to develop core cognitive and emotional capacities. Minor premises: puberty is one of those periods when hormonal and neural systems support identity consolidation. Therefore, altering or delaying puberty could shift or disrupt the timing of that identity critical window, potentially influencing how a person's sense of self organizes and stabilizes. So this is kind of I guess you would call this like a pet theory. So it's kind of putting all the pieces together, and this is just a working hypothesis, right? I don't know that that's true. I suspect it is, and like I said, if you look back at all these, a lot of them link into each other. So critical Hyperion hypothesis would link into the prefrontal cortex maturation. It would link into Erickson theory of mind, and it would also link into the let's see here. This one basically puberty. It would also link into the fact that puberty triggers a bunch of cascades that develop the brain and mature the brain, which was part of, let's see here, which is part of number 2, lack of surgical options, bad options, and no effect on mental health. So that was part of number 2 right here. So linking all those together, and that's how a lot of this works. There's a lot of links from one of these pages to another page. From 2, we have a link to 6, to 7, back to 5. Right, these are linked together. There's a lot of links here. There's a lot of overlapping here. And the point is that in order to get healthcare back to these 25 states for gender incongruent youth, it's going to take speaking about it publicly, and it's going to take some maturing of the science and discussing how the science has matured and how we have dialed in that range of when, where, and why and how we use this. And a lot of people, in regards to this, like, this would be great news for a lot of people. Like, a lot of people I've heard, transmedicalization. This is the opposite of that. This is kind of good news. Like, if I went to a group of people that were suffering from cancer and I said, look guys, this surgery, this that is expensive, you can't reverse it, and it's dangerous, is not helpful, then that's checking one off the books. That's a good thing. We know that a expensive, dangerous, irreversible surgery is not helpful, and that's a good thing. We've explored the science and we've moved on, and we don't need to subject people to unnecessary risks anymore. And society grows, science grows, life goes on, people get better science, people get better treatment, and that's what we have to be open to in regard to this. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you for listening, actually.